coming in next week in 2 weeks anyway.
Oh, hi, how are you? We're sorry. I caught you out of the corner of my eye. No.
Do I need to put the files higher? Here's mine. Is that okay?
Tie me out.
Sorry, I was trying to help. I really was. Yeah, but it made me stay.
Happy holidays. How are you doing?
Good morning. I want to thank those from the many communities that are here today, as well as thank the press for being here today. I'm going to keep my remarks relatively short, and then I'm going to pass it off to our Deputy Minority Leader, Wayne Lane, who's going to pass it to Dave Denneberg, who's going to pass it to Carrie Lodges, and then obviously we have our two newly elected legislators-elect, Laura Curran, as well as Ellen Birnbaum, that are here with us today. But today, we are demanding from the presiding officer, Norma Gonzalez, that we hold hearings. The fact remains that, to me, it's unconscionable that in 2013, as we get ready to end this year, and folks don't believe that a crime was committed. The fact, one quick thing to remember, is that there's clearly witness intimidation from the fact that Randy White was asked to come back to court to try to clear up what some believe was a perjury situation, and there was clearly an abuse of power. There's over 80,000 open warrants in Nassau County, and the Commissioner of Police, Thomas Dale, chose to pick this one. So from that standpoint alone, choosing to pick that warrant on that day because of a phone call that he received from a private citizen, to me is just flat out wrong. It's an abuse of power. And that is the reason why it's necessary that we hold legislative hearings. I read the comments, like many of you, over the weekend from the presiding officer, that she is waiting to see some of the facts come down. Well, the facts will only come out if you have a legislative hearing. And a legislative hearing will only happen is if the presiding officer calls for a hearing. We are the checks and balances in this county. The legislature, regardless of whether you're a Republican or Democrat, that part is irrelevant. When a crime is committed, it is the legislative responsibility to investigate the other branches. Our responsibility is to ensure that the crime truly, if it does, stops with Thomas Dale. If it goes up higher, the legislative hearings will bring that to the forefront. But that's the only way you get to the bottom of it. And for me, to hear about that she wants to see some of the facts come out before we decide what direction we're going to go, and obviously I'm paraphrasing, is wrong. And it's walking away from our responsibility. And it's walking away from the fact that we're going to choose to decide whether we're going to have hearings, clearly because of political relationships, and that's just wrong. And that segues into my second commentary. I consider Kathleen Rice a good and dear friend, and I hope, regardless of what our comments is and our disagreement today, we continue to be good friends. But the fact remains her case and her investigation did not go far enough. I read the report, the 4-page letter, and there are still outstanding questions which I truly believe lead to the fact on why we need to have legislative hearings. But I think we have to go one step further. There is a public trust that has been abandoned in this case. You have the Commissioner of Police, the highest held office in that department, that has abused or perceived has abused his power. That being said, we need to make sure we have a very clear picture and a very clear and fresh eyes to look at this. We're going to ask for, in the coming days, that our New York State Attorney General, as well as other federal prosecutors, take a fresh look at this particular case, because we have to make sure we get it right. And the last thing we want to make sure, the last thing we do not need in Nassau County is to continually to perpetuate a wrong. Randy White's civil rights were violated. That is a fact. You could not tell me that out of the 84,000 open warrants that they chose to pick on this one on this day, which just coincides with a couple of days after the fact, he testified in court against the Hardwick candidacy, which all people in this county knows was working very well in conjunction with Mangano's candidacy. It was siphoning off votes. Now, whether you believe in the politics or not, that's irrelevant from my standpoint. The fact remains that they could have picked any day of the year to prosecute that open warrant, but they chose that day. And that day, basically, out of 84,000 warrants, for those that want to try to believe that Thomas Dale didn't do anything wrong, but out of those 84,000 warrants, they chose that warrant. And that's what makes it wrong, because a simple push of the button by a private citizen moved the pendulum to arrest that young man. So from that standpoint alone, we need to make sure we get fresh eyes on this, we get a fresh look on this, because we cannot tolerate any abuse of power or any witness intimidation in this county. And that's what legislative hearings will bring about. And that's why it's so important that we're going to continue to push. You can tell if these cameras were turned around, the community, this is only a small segment that have expressed their outrage in the last few days. It's going to get more and more and more, it's going to develop more and more over the coming days. And I truly believe there's going to be an enormous amount of pressure on the presiding officer to hold special hearings on this process to make sure we get to the bottom of this particular incident. So before I take any additional questions, I do want to ask our Deputy Minority Leader, Wayne Wink, for some comments as well. Wayne?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You know, generally speaking, the rule of thumb is extreme cases make bad law. And individualized cases do not, I think, lend themselves to legislative hearings as a blunt instrument towards policy change. However, in this case, we are seeing so many different policies that seem to be called into question. The policy of plucking a particular warrant out of thin air to then go about making a very high-profile arrest. The process and the policy of allowing an opportunity for a civil subpoena to be served on somebody while in police custody seems to me to be a policy that is begging for questioning. This legislature, in the last 4 years, has been an abdication. They have abdicated their responsibilities as an oversight body in this county. Time and again we heard, whether it was Peter Schmidt or Norma Gonzalez, they would announce, we'll talk about this issue when the county executive gives us something to consider. Okay? The blinders that have been put on this legislature are, I believe, part of the real problem here overall. The fact remains that there are policies in question here, there are procedures that are seriously in jeopardy, and quite frankly, there are people who have been caught up in it who are relative innocents in this entire process. It seems to me this legislation needs to finally, over the last 4 years, finally reassert its authority, reassert its oversight capacity here in Nassau County, and make sure that we overturn and we turn over, quite frankly, every one of the stones that seems to be laying around in this case. As we go forward, I know there's going to be a lot more unanswered questions that are going to be uncovered. We, as a legislature, need to be in a position to go forward and to start questioning some of these policies, to make sure the training is in place. You know, there's been a lot of stories in recent days about police alleged misconduct, from high to low, top to bottom, rank and file, all the way up to the very top, our commissioner. It seems to me now is the time this legislature needs to assert its authority and make sure the training, the policies, and procedures of this department are in fact being followed. Thank you.
The one thing I do want to point out before I ask Legislator Denenberg to speak is that we've all seen the front page of Newsday, which categorizes Commissioner Dale being out. One of the things that if you read deeper, Commissioner Dale as well as Chief Detectives Capisi are leaving with their pension. They obviously realize that something was done wrong that forced them to resign, but they're leaving with their pension, which every single Nassau County resident should be outraged by. The fact that the district attorney has basically determined that there was not a crime committed, they have full entitlement to their pensions, which if they were charged, it would probably, could possibly reverse this in the opposite direction. So that is something that you have to be able to focus on for 1 second, because you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in these pensions. And that's something that's very viable, and that's something that if this was charged criminally, could very well hold up. So Dave?
You know, there's several items here that deserve attention. I'll say this. It's naive to think that what was revealed last week wasn't witness intimidation. It's naive to think that Mangano and his administration didn't know what was going on. It's also naive to think that there isn't outside influence, political influence in the police department for this to have happened. And it's naive to think that it wasn't a violation of Randy White's civil rights. And that's something certainly that the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn should look at. Can you imagine if Police Commissioner Kelly had done this? Can you imagine the outrage if Police Commissioner Kelly was pulling a young African American off of a bus with 3 or 4 officers for a bench warrant when there's 80,000 others outstanding? 1 month before an election, 2 days before 2 days after Mr. White testified, and then he gets served with a subpoena to testify again. It would really be naive to avoid all those issues. And that should come up in legislative hearings, and that should also be subject to investigations by outsiders whose job it is to protect civil rights. And that includes the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn. But I'll say this, and I'm looking at Carrier standing right next to me. He and I have called for hearings. Can you imagine since 2010, when the Republicans took the majority, there's not been a single public safety, full-fledged, or finance committee hearing, despite our repeated requests that there should be hearings on consolidation, on the record level of police overtime. When Peter Schmidt brought up the Joanna Byrd case, I asked him on the floor, we're going to have a hearing on what you're yelling at instead of just yelling. Where the oversight? Where the check and balance? Not a single hearing. Legislator Szilagyi, myself, wrote in August 2012. I wrote again in April 2013. And then last Monday, I asked for a hearing on the disciplinary proceedings, as well as the overtime, as well as the consolidation issue, as well as a computer system that the police department still can't get operational. Item after item in this police department has been called into question. Mr. Mangano calls in an outsider who's supposedly a disciplinarian who told this legislature, hold me accountable, and then no one did a hearing. Last Monday I was asked him to hold him accountable, and then on Friday, now we clearly need a hearing, even on the person who was supposedly held accountable. And for Mr. Mangano to be the opposite of Harry Truman and say the buck doesn't stop with him, the legislature says the buck stops with him. 2 high-level appointments have had to be forced out in the last month. He needs to answer for it. He needs to answer for the waste of taxpayer funds. He needs to answer for the witness intimidation, for the outside influence in our police department, for the civil rights violations. And the legislature's job is to make him answer and to report our findings to special prosecutors if need be, to the U.S. Attorney's Office if need be. But for anyone to say we haven't been calling for those hearings over the last 4 years, we have. We have. And it's really time, it's almost too late, because Commissioner Dale said, hold him accountable. We voted to change disciplinary proceedings, which I didn't trust the man, I didn't trust the issue, I voted against that, but we should have held him accountable and see what he was doing. Obviously, the disciplinary proceedings should have been on himself. And now Mr. Mangano, let me just close by saying Mr. Mangano got on the next day was Mr. Mangano, as if he had nothing to do with this, saying, I'm going to hire an outside commissioner who's a disciplinarian. What was Tom Dale? What was Tom Dale? That didn't work. And it's the legislature that has to, the first line of defense for the taxpayers is us. Time we do our job. No hearings after 4 years. No one should tolerate that anymore. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Kerry A. Salage, the legislator for the 3rd District. I thank everyone for being here today. Thank my colleagues. Ladies and gentlemen, what we need here is investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office to see if any official misconduct, 195 of the CPL, was committed by any public official here in Nassau County. This is the opportunity for this legislative body, this institution, to preserve its integrity, for us to preserve or change the image that we have in which anything goes here in Nassau County. All my friends in New York City look at our system of government as a joke, and this example just justifies that. We cannot have this any longer in Nassau County. This is about the civil rights of a young man that were stepped on and violated. You know, we last week took a moment to recognize the legacy of Nelson Mandela, a great freedom fighter. How could we really say that we believe in accountability and democracy if we're allowing this to happen in Nassau County? If this were to happen to a young man who attended Garden City High School or another young woman, this would be a bigger issue. We cannot allow this just to be swept under the rug. This is our opportunity to preserve our integrity. And so I'm asking all of our friends, all of our supporting community organizations like the NAACP and other, and I do see a representative here, Ms. Scotty Coates from the NAACP, and other leaders in our community, to please stand up and please speak up about this issue. We must demand, Frederick Douglass said it best, that progress does not concede anything without a demand. We must demand upon our U.S. Attorney to investigate this. Now, I take the District Attorney at her word that this investigation is continuing, but I'm hoping that we push and pursue an investigation and it reveals what actually happened. To our presiding officer, Mr. Norman Gonsalves, the legislature has an investigatory power to issue subpoenas. I'm hoping that we issue subpoenas upon all those in the police department and all those upon the Gatto administration to find out what actually happened. We must do this, we must do it now, and we cannot wait for this, and thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Legislator Delia Ritchie Whitten, and I currently represent the 18. I really think if everyone looks at the facts of this case, it involves so many different elected officials, possibly appointed officials, government buildings, and everything else. This is really the case that cries out for a grand jury investigation. I have complete respect for Kathleen Rice. I consider her a friend, and I respect everything she does. And I do believe, like Harriet just mentioned, that she is continuing with her investigation. But from this public outcry in the last few days, I think that we really owe it to our the people we represent, to go ahead and move forward with this type of investigation. The only other thing I want to mention, I know that County Executive McGowan mentioned he's going to be looking outside. And maybe that's part of the solution, but we were guaranteed that when Dale was brought to us. And I don't think any of us voted for him. I know I voted against him. I was trying to remember the exact vote. Because we kind of had the feeling that he was a bit disconnected. I would love for us to have some kind of input as to who replaces him. I really think, I'm a firm believer that we do have a very good police department. I believe there's a lot of people that really work very hard. And unfortunately, it's just a few bad examples like this that can really not only make our county look bad, make the police department look bad, and make our citizens feel uncomfortable. And as Carrie said again, that's the last thing we want to have in our Nassau County. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delia. Can I ask our legislator-elect, Laura Bird?
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'll make this very brief. To me, this is a long and complicated chain of events that has affected many people's lives very, very profoundly. And I think any investigation would have to uncover exactly what the phone call was, what the favor was that started this whole chain of events, this whole domino fall. And I'm eager to see what that answer is. Thank you.
I'll ask our last speaker before we take questions, Ellen Bergman, our legislator-elect.
I think my fellow colleagues here have pretty much said it all, but I just want to reiterate that I think it's incumbent upon us to bring out the facts. And as I campaigned for this position, I talked about transparency in government. Well, we need to really investigate what happened, and the proper forum is legislative hearings. And I, for one, look forward to being part of committees that hold meetings and are accountable to our citizens. We represent you in Nassau County, and we owe it to you to have hearings, look into issues, and what more could we ask for that in a case like this, which has such ramifications? It needs a full body to investigate it. So I really would love to see hearings on this issue, and I think that's the proper way to go forward and to put Nassau County back in on the right track of government. Thank you.
Just before I take questions, I think Dave, Wayne, Carrier, everybody up here, Delia said it best in regards to the county executive's next hire for the police department. Obviously, there are fundamental practices that have been totally broken during this process. A legislative hearing, us demanding a legislative hearing, we can address some of these practices that have fallen short. I couldn't see why you would put somebody, a new commissioner, in a position with faulty practices so that this can happen again because of human error and because of human practices. We need to put in the fail-safe mechanism so that we protect the county, this institution, from this ever happening again. And that's why it's so important to have legislative hearings and thorough and real hearings so that we can get to the bottom of what happened, what phone calls were placed, and how this happened on the same time frame as we talked about before during the election cycle. So that being said, I'll be happy to take any questions from any of the members of the press.
Do you suspect or have any reason to believe the county executive was aware of this arrest, perhaps even directed it himself? I mean, what's your suspicion and what reason do you have?
I think every single person in this county suspicion believes that it's hard to believe that the county executive is not involved with something that is so high level. And the fact that Commissioner Dale, outside of the fact of possibly keeping his job for the next 4 years, what would be his motivation behind taking a call from a private citizen and therefore, from that standpoint, deciding to take some type of charge on Randy White? Also keeping that in mind, knowing the police strings to pull to be able to pull this off as well, we don't know. But obviously we need to have hearings to whether validate or invalidate our suspicions. And that's why it's so important that we have this particular process in place. And that's why, and I think Dave said it best, we are the checks and balances to the executive branch. Regardless of whether they're Republican and we're Democrat, they're Republican, that's irrelevant. The fact remains that if you take this legislative body in high regard, you should ensure that if there was any crime or any malpractice or anything that has been committed, we should make sure that we get to the bottom of it.
You know, I said already that it would be naive to think that this commissioner, who was an outsider, all of a sudden 1 month before an election, knew all the players, knew the ramifications, has this much police resources, taxpayer money, dedicated to pulling one person off of a bus, having him served with a subpoena, and the county executive didn't know. I would think that that's somewhat naive. But let's say that the county executive didn't know. Then he has to answer how he doesn't know about that kind of outside influence at the most upper echelons of his department. When he's the one who brought in this outsider, said he's going to be a disciplinarian, and said let the bucks, let this guy answer for it. So if he did know, he has to answer for it, and if he didn't know, then he really has to answer for it.
Yeah, I just to piggyback on Dave's sentiments, I mean, either way, I don't think it looks good for the county executive. Whether he knew and he was a part of a cover-up and obviously a case of witness intimidation, or he didn't know and pretty much it's conceivable to think that he's out of touch and not in constant communication with his police department. So either way, you can pick your poison, but it does not look good for the county executive.
Remember, this is not a rank and file police officer that he has no contact with. This was his appointment, the top cop, the commissioner of police, and his top brass.
Have you personally reached out to Indiana, or did you get a response?
I spoke to many. I spoke to the county executive the day Commissioner Dale stepped down, which was on Thursday, and at that time, he just informed me that Commissioner Dale was stepping down. And then I asked him, I believe, is there a current replacement? He didn't share with me too much the nature of what we've come out in the last few weeks. He just said that the district attorney has done a report, and though Commissioner Dale has not done anything warranting a criminal investigation or criminal charges, he felt that at this time it would be best for him to resign, and he resigned. That's the only conversation I've had with the county executive.
Do you find it odd, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know, the county executive hasn't made any public comment whatsoever other than a prepared statement on the resignation of his commissioner. Do you find that odd in any way? I mean, someone so significant to his administration, there's no talking to reporters in any way, no public statement?
Yeah, no, I do find that odd, but at the same time, there's a lot of things that occur in Nassau County that strike me as odd. That being said, it's odd, but I'm not surprised. And to me, the county executive should have the opportunity to fully go through the legislative hearing process so that we can understand exactly what his involvement was versus what his involvement wasn't. I mean, to go based off of the investigative report that we've seen, it sounds like he hasn't done anything, but there's a lot of open-ended questions based off the report that we have, which we are looking for the proper venue in legislative hearings to ask.
And it sounds like the county executive feels like he doesn't have to answer questions because he knows that the rubber stamp Republican majority hasn't called him into question at all. There's been no check and balance. Then you can make statements like that and not worry about it.
But the point is that the county executive, nor is this body above the law. The law must be followed here. And we're asking for a proper investigation, and I would love that investigation to be by the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Have you guys reached out to the U.S. Attorney's Office, or has anyone been mentioned from the Attorney's Office, or is that something that's been formally done yet?
We're preparing letters today that are going to go out to several agencies. The Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney's Office, that will be going out asking for a fresh look, someone to take a fresh look and have a fresh perspective on Nassau County so that we can really, truly find out what happened from that standpoint.
And this would not be the first example of us doing that. When it was discovered that stats with the 5th precinct, which is located in my community, were incorrect, I had asked and reached out to the FBI to look into this matter, knowing that if we kept it here just in Nassau, I wouldn't go further. So this is, by myself, the second attempt of reaching out to an outside body for help.
Yeah, well, we did that in
Yes.
August 2012 and then again in April.
Carrie, can I just ask you one thing, especially with Carrier's district? When we had the hearings about consolidating the police precincts, Dale was very outspoken in saying that after being here for a month, he was confident that everything would be all right. And I remember asking him once how many cells he had in one particular precinct. He had absolutely no idea. And when he answered, he just said, I have no idea. Like he wasn't even embarrassed, in my opinion, of the fact that he really wasn't familiar with how our precincts ran and how our department ran, in my opinion. So I really think this is another opportunity for us to look into such things as such what Carrie was just mentioning with the 5th or 3rd, or even mine with the 6th. I really think we should re-examine it, and that would be another request I would have for whoever takes over Dale's position.
If you may recall, I did not vote for Commissioner Dale because he clothed himself with the police consolidation plan. Very happy to vote for the bond. My father is a real police officer, someone who put his life on the line every day for his community. I also, being a former prosecutor, can appreciate those who do their job with integrity. Let this not be a black eye on all police officers. There are many police officers who do their job here. But once again, we're faced with an incompetent administration, and now we must do our job to find out what happened exactly.
vote on him being the commissioner, ratifying that appointment, happened at the same day that Commissioner Dale, or the same week, Commissioner Dale gave us the consolidation plan at a public safety meeting 2 minutes before it started. And then said, I thought that you were just teeing it up like it was a golf game. And the chairman of that committee, Dennis Dunn, 4 times tried to just say, let's just vote it through and tee it up. And the members of the Democratic minority asked a number of questions, and Mr. Dale kept saying he didn't have the answers and kept trying to walk out. So for that alone, all of us in the minority voted against his ratification as commissioner because we saw him not even being forthcoming in what he was going to say his signature plan was going to be, consolidation. And all of us have requested, I mentioned August 2012, April 2013, and as recently as December 9th, asking for hearings into the status of the consolidation, the cost, the overtime, as well as a change in legislative procedures for discipline and how that was working out. So we were calling for hearings before this event, but this event really is more than the icing on the cake. It just cries out for the checks and balances.
Absolutely. You know,
I don't say if there's any more questions, but I'll let Carrie finish this story.
no, just we're looking out for the national taxpayer. You know, we've been conservative with the budget. We're very diligent when it comes to public safety issues. We're looking out for the taxpayer. But we're asking now for the taxpayer to please join us in this struggle to protect our freedoms. Totalitarian and dictatorship regimes all across this world have gained their power from police misconduct. This is our opportunity to review and to analyze the influence upon politics upon our public safety.
Thank you. Thank you.
One last question. Would you consider holding up the appointment of a new police commissioner, permanent police commissioner, until there are hearings or investigation? I mean, are you prepared to stop that?
Well, we can't stop the appointment of the next commissioner because we don't control the legislature. We only have, going into January, we'll have 8 votes. So they could pretty much do what they will do in order to ensure that the commissioner come in. But keep in mind, make no mistake about it, we will definitely be at the forefront to ensure that we will object to any new appointment for a commissioner without the proper hearings in place so that we know that that new commissioner is stepping into a change in the practice on how these particular incidences will not happen again. So we need to see movement on legislative hearings, or we're going to continue to bring this issue to the forefront every single day of every single week until we do that, until that happens.
Thank you.
Thank you.